last week and up to today. They will be added to the list unless the superintendent gets to them before we get back together again. Or during, we can also answer some of your questions during our meetings that are coming up on Thursday. We have all of our meetings back to back on Thursday. Thank you guys for that order. I love it. Thank you. All right. So for item C, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bryant.
All right. Thank you, Madam President. It's a pleasure to be back. So we'll have two presentations today. One on the budget development process for this upcoming year and potentially revisions that will for the board next time we meet. And then we'll have another presentation on the CIP.
All right. Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
So today I want to go over some of the budget revision that we're going to put to the board tonight and give you a brief overview of what our FY25, just kind of a really rough estimate of what that outlook looks like. The calendar here is last year's, the FY23 calendar, where we're trying to finish up developing our FY24 budget. As you know, the legislature went into extended session, and that's that very last piece. And with the information we grabbed out of the extended session, now we created our budget revision. This is the first time we've done a full-scale formal budget revision like this in the last several years, so it's all it'll probably be a new process for most of you that haven't seen this. For the next slide, the changes that were made in the FY24 proposed budget revision is through HB 281. It originally provided $175 million of one-time funding statewide, of which the Anchorage share would have been about $50 million. That was subsequently vetoed in half by the governor, and we are due to get about a little under 25 million. We used just under half of that money to make some changes to our budget, including contractual changes with labor contracts that were finalized after the budget was approved, as well as implementing the Alaska Reads Act, allocating money to charter schools, and then some other costs that we'll go through in a little bit in a later slide. So we will get to that. And then we'll go through some other departmental alignment changes that didn't really have any value to them, but just how we're process or who has responsibility for different areas. So first, this is our new revenue schedule. The two major changes are the $24.9 million that we expect to receive in the one-time funding from the grant. And then we reduced our reliance on savings by about $12.5 million. It was $44.9 million in the original budget. And then we're going to reduce that by the amount of the money we're not spending through from the state money. So those are the two line items you'll see change on our revenue. The overall increase is about $12.4 million. So how is that money spent? So the first and biggest pot of that was on contractual obligations for salaries and benefits. This is the contracts that were approved after budget development again. This also triggered some Me Too clauses for medical benefits and other labor contracts that say, if you're in the district's plan, we're going to pay at least this amount, or we're going to match those amounts essentially to what the other groups are getting. And that ensures parity about all the groups paying into the district plan the same amount. Another big item was an increase in substitute teacher pay. That was last updated in January of 2015. It was $150. We're proposing that the sub teacher pay go up to $175 a day. Really, we're having trouble finding substitutes, just like we are in many other positions, and we need to adjust those rates for inflation. The Reads Act, that's about $2.8 million. That's mostly training and addenda for implementing the Reads Act. It also includes $755,000 for new 4-5 curriculum in that amount. The one item on there that I would like to address and get some feedback from this board is we have $805,000 budgeted for bringing back our K-3 teachers a couple days early to be able to train them on this CKLA curriculum and that we just purchased and came in. While other items on this list for the professional development and other changes either won't happen until after the board approves this budget or are within the administration's the administration's ability to transfer things that are under 200,000. This one is kind of an anomaly, as this needs to occur prior to the board actually approving this budget revision on August 15th. I believe these teachers are going to come back on the 10th and 11th. So we really don't want to fall out of board policy by having these folks come back, do the training, and then owe them the money without this being approved. So I want to try to get some suggestions, I guess, on how we should go about addressing this, because I don't want to run afoul of board policy, but it won't be approved until after the work happens and it exceeds the superintendent's authority for transfers. If the board is comfortable with it, straw poll like, hey, this is fine. We really do need to do this because it's new curriculum. The teachers haven't seen it yet. They really need this time to get trained on it. It's important to make this curriculum effective, but again, we do have the board policy in place that I don't want to kind of get sideways there. So I guess I can pause there and see if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Thank you. Is the CKLA training, how much did you say? 800,000?
About 805,000 to bring the teachers back a couple days early.
Okay, and that'll be like next week?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members at this point? Any others? Yeah, no, okay, I'm not seeing, okay, member Lessons.
I think maybe the one question I have is whether teachers have already been alerted that there is a possibility or a likelihood that they will be asked to be present during those days, or whether this would be a surprise to them.
I believe they have been, they're all spun up to be able to come back already, I think.
Okay. All right. Go on. Continue. Oh, I did have a question on your first slide. Could you go back? I can't, one before that. All right. So the new costs, those are additions to the current budget, right? That 12.4?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. You can continue.
Right. And all those,
all the items on that.
Yeah, those add up to the 12.4 million.
Okay.
But if the board is okay with just going forward with the plan to have these teachers come back, knowing we need to train them, but it's kind of outside of policy. I don't know if we need some sort of waiver of board policy for this, or how we want that to look. But I just don't want to get in the position where the board comes back on the 15th, makes an amendment to take out that 805,000, and then we still have to pay them.
So personally, it's always been my understanding, number one, that we would train teachers prior to the beginning of the school year.
Yeah.
And I know that was impacted by the cut that in the budget, in the funds from the legislature. Any other comments? Member Jacobs?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I didn't chime in intentionally because I was trying to find what options we have in our board policy about either a poll or an emergency meeting. I don't know if there it would have been maybe helpful. And I don't know if there's anything you could have done within board policy to let us know ahead of time, just so I could have done a bit more research. Would have been glad to try to identify a couple of paths forward. I, like President Bellamy, anticipated us doing this. I think I was encouraging this something as early as last summer, us expanding professional development time ahead of the school year. I don't know how we get around the board policy, but I'll see if I can work with the president to figure out something if we don't decide something today.
Okay. Any other comments? Member Holloman, and then we'll come you Member Lessons. Okay. Member Lessons.
We could also, just thinking through, we have a finance meeting on Thursday in which the finance committee could offer formal guidance if that would be of use. I don't know how that would align with board policy. Member Jacobs is shaking his head. But that would be a space to review this particular item.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not quite sure how to get around it, but there has to be, where there's a will, there's a way. And I can do some more research. Where's Katie? I know we've done this before. This won't be our first time having to do this kind of make this kind of a decision. But but so hopefully at some point between now and 11 p.m. we'll have a solution. That's all I can say. Right now, is there anyone just a straw poll to move forward with the training? Is there anybody against moving forward with the training? I guess I'd want to know that. While that is not an official vote, it is included in a memo, which we will, in memo 112, I think it is. Member Jacobs.
Yeah, I'm not against the training whatsoever. I did have a different question about the revisions when possible.
All right. That's fine.
Yep, thank you. I was just curious, while we're increasing the substitute pay rate, do you have, I'm assuming you have a sense as to where the 175 lands and compared to Matsu or other school districts nearby? Is that competitive, or are we looking at having to raise it again next year?
I'm not totally sure how competitive that is with our surrounding districts. Look to Marty to see if he knows.
Yeah, Marty Lang, Chief Human Resource Officer. We did have a conversation in Chiefs about raising the rate initially, and we did look up Matsu's rates, and these are comparable for their sort of daily sub rates. The other thing that is embedded in that dollar figure is we also added a tier to the sub rates. We are now going to offer $225 a day for anyone who is a substitute teacher who carries a teaching certificate, in the hopes that we could attract back some of our retired teachers on a part-time basis, or other folks who may be out in our community who have a teaching cert. And so that definitely will make us more competitive and hopefully bring some of that expertise back into our buildings, at least on a part-time basis.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any follow-up? You good? All right. Member Leslie.
Are there any other areas within the district that might need additional salary increases to fully staff areas of concern? That's a bigger question, perhaps.
I can take that one. It's very likely, and that will be a topic that we'll discuss with regards to contracts and executive session.
Okay, so I do have an idea. If we bifurcate out the training from memo 12, have it go directly to finance, and then finance issue a memo that goes directly to consent agenda. We still have to vote on it. We won't vote early. But
right. My understanding that would take place on the 15th after the training is done still.
Right. But so that wouldn't be a guarantee enough for you. What, you don't trust us?
No, I'm just making sure you guys know.
I'm joking.
I didn't think there would be any issues, but I certainly wanted to raise the issue and say, this is going to happen. So when it does come up on the 15th,
okay,
and it's already happened, like, well,
yeah, I know. Yeah, I get you. I hear you. All right.
You're fine with just letting it go, and with the support that we do need to provide this training so our teachers know how to use the curriculum.
Absolutely.
That's also fine with me.
Okay. And we can call a special meeting just for the purpose of approving, but it would still have to be bifurcated from the whole memo, or we do the whole memo. The board would have to decide. We'll work on it.
All right.
Again, we got to 11 o'clock tonight.
All right.
We won't be there that long anyway. Go on.
All right. So the other items that we have on this list for the additions is the charter school allocation. This is their proportionate share of the one-time funds, which is based on the adjusted ADM as compared to the district's adjusted ADM. We've added a finance technician that's going to be split between all the three of the correspondence schools. We came to an issue this past spring when we got a lot of this last year really, with the increase in the number of correspondence students that we have. We are having a long lag time on being able to get parent reimbursements complete. So we weren't being able to reimburse parents for 8, 10, 12 weeks at a time whenever they would submit for their reimbursements. And really it just comes down to we need more bodies to be able to review and process this. So we met with the correspondence programs, and we want to add one staff member in finance paid for by the correspondence programs to be able to work solely on processing these just to get parents paid faster and have our customers a little happier there. A security specialist was added to address kind of the security that we have downstairs. This would be someone who sits out front and just monitors the traffic coming in and out of the building. So that's one FTE, and then we added a 0.2 FTE into the general fund for the early learning director. And really this is to prevent any sort of supplanting issues. Before it was paid for out of special education and title funds. Now it's going to be split 3 ways, with general fund picking up that cost as we pick up more general ed preschool programs that are paid out of the general fund or city grants. We need to be able to split that cost so we don't run afoul of any federal supplanting rules. Then we had a few other position changes. We organized some positions in finance where we removed a couple of AAs and added and changed them to finance techs. We removed our controller position and downgraded that to a IT programmer to help clean up some of our financial reporting to make that more efficient. And then there were a couple of changes in comms and I believe in mental health. Those are all detailed out, and again in that Appendix H that's attached to your budget. And then we also had about $590,000 in other costs. Some of that's going to our school-based security for training and supplies like shirts or something, so we can identify those as security personnel at the schools. $126,000 went to storage rental as Alaska Native Charter School vacated that MapMade building. We're picking up that lease because we have all this other, as we change out these curriculums, we need to pick that up for a year to be able to have extra storage space just to be able to kind of process this curriculum coming in and out and all this other, all the COVID stuff that we have remaining. Hopefully that only goes on for a year, but we do need to pick up that cost as ANCCS. They were paying for it before, and now we still have stuff in there and we need to continue paying for the space. Other items are we brought principals back a few days early to help get them trained up on some of these other curriculum items. Addenda for PLCs for the late start on Mondays for someone to lead those. And then middle school debate was added in there as well. So that rounds out the cost increases that we've had for the FY24 revision. If there are any more questions on that.
I'm not seeing any. So let's continue.
Okay. We did realign some departments at a zero cost. We moved the new hire induction and coaching funds in from HR into teaching and learning so they can better help support our teachers. But it's just moving from one bucket to the other. And then we have a few new account codes in here. Special schools moved from organization 1670 to 1882 to better align with our state chart of accounts. And Family Partnership has a new account code of 1831 to move it out of the charter school org codes of the 1500s or 1540 specifically. And then lastly, we changed Paidea's name to AK Choice. But those were all $0. Mm-hmm. So looking ahead, we have a very can't emphasize that enough, very rough estimate of what our deficit might be for FY25. There's a lot of unknowns based on the biggest one being, or two biggest ones being enrollment, which this is based on a static, if the enrollment stays the same as we had projected based on the December 22 projections. And then we have 3 unsettled labor contracts for our largest 3 bargaining groups, which could vastly change that deficit. That's the revenue, but really the structural deficit, $95 million, it's calculated as our $630 million operating budget, which is our general fund budget of about $610 million or $611, and then our $20 million of ESSER funded teachers still. You add 3% inflation to that, you get to about $649 million of operating costs for 25, with $554 million is our projected revenue based on currently what's in state statute and current enrollment projections. So that's a $95 million structural deficit. We estimate we're going to have about $30 million in fund balance available. Some of it comes from putting the one-time funding in or not spending all the one-time funding from the state. And the other is, since we did the initial projection back in late November, early December of how we would end this fiscal year, if you paid attention to the finance committees, that's steadily gone up over the course of the last few months. But notable items that changed from November to now, essentially, that added that other 18 million or so was a combination of a lot of things. One, the biggest ones are interest earnings went up quite a bit. Our state revenue for intensive needs students went up quite a bit, and then we had more federal impact aid and emergency connectivity money than expected on our revenue. And then we got additional state money to help pay for the cost of nurses to bring down our expenses. Our workers' comp claims were lower, and as well as our unemployment, utilities, and some of our other supplies and equipment chart were lower than we originally projected. We'll go through this in more detail when we go to the Finance Committee on Thursday, but just to give you an idea of where that money came from, kind of a broad stroke. So that's what we're looking at. We'll have about a $95 million deficit starting. We think we can buy it down by about $30 million. Depending on what the enrollment comes back and how many vacancies we have this year, that $30 million could certainly change, but that's kind of where we're at this point in time.
Questions? Member Lessons?
Just wanted to clarify that the estimated $30 million in fund balance includes the remaining FY24 funds, which are not included in Appendix H, right? So there'd be things that we are receiving from House Bill 281.
So about $12.5 million, yeah, would increase.
So that's included now in the fund balance or in the projected fund balance?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, no, I'm sorry. So the 95 structural deficit represents what? The rollover? Is that what I heard? I mean, the carryover as well as the
95 structural deficit represents the amount of money it would probably cost, with some really broad assumptions to operate in FY25, the same as we're planning to operate in 24, versus how much revenue we expect to get in.
Okay.
And then we think we're going to have about $30 million or so in savings still to be able to offset that, to buy the deficit down to about $65 million.
Okay, all right.
But still that structural deficit would
So
remain.
I was thinking about it right. I got a little.
And that $5 down of $30 million is inclusive of maybe remaining FY24 one-time funds.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Member Jacobs, and then we'll go to Member Higgins.
Thank you, Madam President. So researching really quick in board policy, the two likely options, we could choose to add the memo and then bifurcate, as you suggested, Madam President, to the action item list today. It does indicate in our board policy that there should be an emergency or urgent public necessity. I'm not sure how each of us feels about that. The other option would be a quick 30-minute meeting sometime between now and when those funds are needed. I don't know that I have a preference right now, but those seem to be the two options. I would encourage us not to, especially since we're all supportive, just look the other way and just vote out on the 15th after the funds have already been expended. I think we should do one or the other, but those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And I think now that I'm thinking about it, I think the cleanest way is for us to just call a special session and vote on that item. But we would have to bifurcate it tonight. Thank you. Member Higgins, I see your mic's on.
I fully expected to have a good news, bad news here, and I missed the good news. But the estimated 30 million in fund balance, how does that compare to where we are mandatory have to have a fund balance? This is the fund balance we should maintain because we have contingencies out there beyond that. And then the 30 million, what does all that break out?
So the 30 million would draw it down. If we're to spin that out, all things being equal, that would draw the fund balance back down to the 8% board minimum. We'd keep our contingencies for all the other things we're supposed to, our self-insurance, our bond debt, things like that. So it would just draw it down to the board minimum, essentially.
Okay. We'll still leave 8, but 8 is what we consider to be responsible. I mean, I think we're required to have 4 or 5%, but that's not sufficient to handle the contingencies that we've got out there. That's all I was checking on. But thank you.
Okay. Member Lessons?
I guess I just want to maybe ask the superintendent to speak to some language that I recall from maybe 6-8 weeks ago, and you were speaking, it was in an email or a letter to someone or to the community, and you spoke about what a $65 million deficit meant in terms of jobs. And I've referred to $65 million as about 650 jobs. And I just wonder if you could say that, yes, that's still a relevant, that's the scale and scope, that's the magnitude of our deficit, is that we would be looking at losing more positions than we would normally experience due to sort of natural attrition. I'd like to hand the mic off and ask you to just sort of speak up. What is the scale of $65 million?
Sure. I don't have the exact FTE offhand, but the point is that we're in a severe structural deficit due to unstable and inadequate funding from the state. And we're at a point to where looking at positions is essentially one of the only structural things that we have in our back pocket at this point, other than continuing to raise PTR. So that's kind of my take.
And I would add, a $65 million deficit would be roughly 650 positions. I mean, it really depends on the type of position you get. An FTE for a teacher on average is going to cost 116, 117,000, whereas a paraprofessional might be 65,000, depending on which type you hire.
Thanks. I'll just share. I mean, that's the number that I remember reading, and I share that in a few community councils. And when people have spoken to me at the grocery store and at the dentist's office, and it makes people pause. That's a lot of jobs.
It does.
Across Anchorage.
Yeah. Okay. Not seeing any more questions. So can you go back to the very first slide where you had the timeline? Next, yeah, this one. So between July and looks like September, we got a lot of work to do, I guess. And I guess I'm thinking that I guess if I recall our conversation correctly, Dr. Bryant, that we will be doing very similarly what we did last time in terms of our pacing and timing of board discussions, how we use our work sessions in preparation for the development process.
Sure. And this is something that we can deep dive into when we create the plan that we discussed. But essentially, I'd like the board's input on how much engagement would be helpful. We do have the same board and superintendent as we did last year, and a number of these strategies are the same in terms of what we have to work with and what we can do to reduce expenditures. So it may look a little different at the will of the board if there's not a need to go through specific programs again. But some of us may want a reminder on the cost per student of specific programs like immersion and things of that sort. So really, I'll defer to the board on how much engagement would be helpful on that topic.
Okay. Member Jacobs?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I would be interested in hearing an update on some of the things that we either initiated or administration put in place last year. Examples include, I think, Mr. Anderson and others discussed a sunset committee. I think Mr. Fleckenstein was involved in that, where we were examining if we could bring about efficiencies with software, things of that nature. We invested in preventative maintenance with one-time funds. I'm hearing how those dollars were used to mitigate future costs. I think some of that information would be helpful, kind of a 102 class if last year was 101. I agree that going through the same information might not have value considering our meetings are all recorded.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move on? All right. Yes, member Lessons.
Does the administration expect to have conversations about potential school closures as part of a series of town halls that are referenced and as part of the budget development process?
Sure. So I don't anticipate discussing specific schools in October like we did last year. What I've gathered is that the community needs to provide a lot of robust input on the topic, and there seems to be interest in the community from approaching the process differently. So we're considering what that process would look like, but I anticipate the school closure conversation will be separate from the budget development conversation, and I think that's a strategic thing because honestly, they're tackling two different issues, though they are interconnected. School closures is about right-sizing our district to reflect our decrease in enrollment, and that's slightly bigger picture than a year-to-year budget development process.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Member Holloman?
I'm assuming that even as our enrollment decreases, that our workforce has decreased faster and that we are actively trying to recruit people. Would that be correct?
Yes, we're still actively recruiting for positions. We're in a chronic shortage, and one of the reasons why a fund balance increases is because when we don't fill our vacancies, that gets collected into the fund balance. So we have big issues to address for specific groups that we can talk more about later this afternoon. But we are actively hiring, though the calculus will adjust should we need to use tools such as reductions in force or PTR increases.
And I guess that was sort of my making sure I'm on the right track question. My real question is, how does this impact recruitment? Because I know you've got critical spots you need to fill, and yet in an environment where the budget is so unknown.
Yeah. And, this time last year, we were talking about our transportation crisis, right? And the strategies that we implemented were making the wages competitive and offering summer employment to drivers. And we've done similar tactics to address shortages in food services and others. So really our strategy has been to be competitive, but it's going to come at a long-term cost because now we need to consider how do we structurally address the fact that our revenue and expenditures are wildly off.
Thank you. And I have not made a formal request, but this is probably the third time I'm going to bring up boundary, looking at our boundaries. The board voted to look at our boundaries every census. We did that back in 2020. We have not done it. And I think knowing where our kids are within the neighborhood boundaries that we have designed ourselves around is a real important piece for us to have at some point. And I'm hoping that that is part of, that's part of our plan.
Yes, that work is underway, and that might be a good topic for a separate work session as well. That's going to inform the long range plan when it comes to right sizing our footprint.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because I do think I think looking at our right sizing ourselves is different. It's not the money thing that people attached to it the last time around, and that was not our intent. But I mean, so moving forward, I'm glad to know that we have a different plan. I'd like to welcome Member Donnelly. He has joined us online. Not online. He's actually by phone. Member Donnelly, if you do have any comments, we can't move you over off as a panelist on the phone, but we can unmute you. It's *6 on the phone if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question. *6 to unmute. Okay, I can see that he's there. I don't see that he has a question. All right, so we're going to continue with any other questions for Mr. Ratcliffe? Not seeing any. Thank you so much. And we're ready for the next discussion, our CIP. Let me see does he have that?
Okay, to be clear on the CIP, we're going to go through a lot of the projects that were worked on this summer that are on the CIP,
okay,
and give you an overview of what Member Jacobs asked for, which is how did the $3 million get spent, and really kind of do what did we do last summer and what's the way ahead.
Awesome.
And to give you a good feel for expectation for projects that weren't completed this summer, but will be continuing, to give the board a good visibility of what has happened and what does the district look like when you have $50 million worth of construction projects in one summer.
Okay.
So,
Before we get started, Member Donnelly, are you trying to speak? I see that you unmuted yourself, but we can't hear you.
Madam President, I just have too much background noise here, so thank you very much. I'm listening.
Okay, thank you.
we will continue. Thank you.
Okay, I will hand off to Mr. Finisov.
All right, good afternoon. It is my pleasure to talk about all the great things we did over the summer. It was very busy summer for us. 23 projects in construction, $46 million worth of work, and over almost twice as many sites. So we touched almost every school in the district over the summer and got a lot done. That include earthquake repairs, secure vestibule upgrades in 7 of our elementary schools, intercoms, various automation upgrades to improve the environmental features and efficiency of our buildings, and then also various other projects to include siding, window repair, boiler replacement, and so forth. So I'm going to share some pictures. This is Mears siding replacement. If you drive by Mears, you're going to see that there's a whole lot going on. It's going to have a whole new siding to it and windows replaced. It's going to make it a lot more efficient building and a lot more aesthetically pleasing. Next. So Aquarian charter improvements. We put a lot of work into this school. I think we've had some tours of it already from members of the community, and they were pretty impressed, and I think the kids are going to be impressed. It's going to look like a new school when they walk into it when school starts. So another project, which was a result of the settlement, is converting many of the quiet rooms to multi-sensory de-escalation rooms. This has been an ongoing project. Phase 2 of that will continue into next year, but we were happy to get to a number of these schools and fix them. So Bayshore Elementary, we did come across some structural problems with the roof. Our teams and our contractors have been hard at work at fixing those, and we're looking forward to making that a safer and more seismically resilient environment for our students. King Tech earthquake repairs, this is kind of the basic what you're looking at, a lot of pat and paint for earthquake repairs. But if I'm crossing my fingers, because I'm really happy that this is, at least for CP&C, this is our last year of earthquake repairs. So it's been a long road since 2018. I'm not looking forward to the next big quake, but we'll be ready. So one thing I shared with our principals earlier last week was we do have some projects that are going to extend into the school year. These are mainly due to material delays. Many of the effects we saw during COVID are still in play. So we are doing our best to work with those principals to make sure that we minimize the disruption to any operations that will be going on. And I think we have a solid plan moving forward to complete these projects early on in the school year. Also want to talk about some of our secure vestibule projects that are coming up. Once we complete this group of secure vestibule projects, we will pretty much have all the elementary schools completed. And then our plan is to move on to secondary. So that involves bond-dependent projects completed in 2024, 25, and 26. And also to give you an idea of other projects coming up in 24 and 25, these are all mentioned in last year's capital improvement plan. So we've got a busy couple years ahead of us, and we are eager and excited to build great learning environments for our students and staff. So that concludes my briefing. If you have any questions, if not, we'll go into maintenance and operations.
Just one quick question. Over the summer, there was a fire at Mountain View Elementary School, and that's not anything anyone planned for. And I'm just wondering if that is something that is also being addressed, maybe through other funds.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm talking about that.
Excuse me. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all again. So I brought with me today Shannon Rassick. She is Director of Maintenance and Operations. She and I run the M&O department for the district. We also have Carrie Shivers. Carrie is our project manager. And this is, I think, only the second time we've seen Carrie this summer because she's managing 118 projects and has been working about 19 hours a day. Anyway, so thank you very much. Thank you. So just a very quick scope and scale in terms of finances and depth of our projects. Our annual budget for major maintenance, things that fix things, is about $2.8 million. We focus on improving and repair and replacement, extending the life of infrastructure. We don't build things, construct things as capital does, but we maintain and enhance those things and try to keep them from breaking. Earthquake recovery has been a giant distraction for us as well, ongoing for nearly 5 years, and it's slowly winding down. The great news about that is in terms of keeping up with, for instance, Member Jacobs' comment about the extra $3 million to be able to get projects together for things like that, hire people, manage those projects. It'll be really great, and we'll show you where that's gone in total. It'll be really great to be able to move past this burden of FEMA and the extraordinarily burdensome reporting and really be able to actualize more time on more organic things. But the board allocated $3 million, so we wanted to add that as a thank you line as well, acknowledging that we want to talk about that. And then we'll go into some further detail and be able to accommodate questions with Ms. Rassick and Ms. Shivers.
Okay, thank you. Any questions so far? All right, let's keep going.
So I'll just do a quick kickoff here and hand off. We're going to talk about some planned projects, things that we use with our regular budget funds and the $3 million, and talk about how we've been a good steward of the ESSER funds to generate long-term return on investment for the district. And then we're going to talk about these things like unplanned things that happen and come and steal from us, from the public, that we have to address, these natural disasters and so forth. And so I'll start with the team on that.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Just to echo Rob, we really appreciate the support that you guys have shown maintenance and operations over the past few years. It does not go unnoticed, even down to the technician level. At maintenance, a lot of times we are the ones responsible for covering up the emergencies, cleaning them up, making them better, and doing emergency contracts to get things like the Mountain View fire, which I remember my first year with the district, it was burnt down. And so it's a bummer that it's relatively a newer structure in the district and it's burnt down again. But our maintenance team, it's the major maintenance department. We collaborate with contractors. If we have opportunities to kind of throw some work onto CP&C's projects using our funding sources, because they've already got an award to a contractor out there, we try to. But ultimately, we set our budget each year trying to do a certain dollar amount of exterior painting, flooring replacements, elevator modernizations, and things of such. But the emergencies do eat away at that. I think every year we only get more and more emergencies, unfortunately. But that's kind of the nature of the game. So in developing the slides, between what we use the $3 million for, what we use our normal operating budget for, and some of the other funding sources, there's a lot of overlap in terms of the scopes of work done in each of those funding sources. So we broke it into stuff that we planned for and stuff that that hit us kind of unexpectedly. Like Rob mentioned, Carrie's got 118 projects in over 60 schools in the district. Our projects in nature are a lot smaller than CP&C's, but at the end of the day, they still require gathering procurement documentation, developing scopes of work, doing site walkthroughs, inspections, substantial completion, all the same kind of tasks line out. But in our instance, we've got one project manager, one engineering assistant, and then we lean heavily on our supervisors and leads to help run some smaller scale projects. So with a few years ago, we started an LVP initiative where we're replacing pre-K and kinder classrooms with luxury vinyl plank. A lot of them have carpet in them, and carpet is, as Rob's a guru on, is you're not able to disinfect carpet. LVP you can, and so we've been slowly transitioning the worst wear and tear classrooms for the younger kids over to LVP. We do minor roof repairs, so that's a lot of times it's just a section of a roof, or a wing of a school, or just simply walking and patching holes. Elevator modernizations, we'll talk a little more on that. That's pretty much taking the guts out of the elevator, updating certain components in it that are no longer available. I could go on all day about plumbing and heating, all the different pieces of equipment we have to replace that have far exceeded their useful life. We've helped with some updates with student nutrition to extend the life of their equipment. If something goes down over there, we are at risk of a lot of food loss. So it's really important that we invested some money in there. Amongst other things like playground replacements, we've got, I think, 22 wooden play structures that are over 50 years old still in the district. We're slowly trying to chip away at a few a year, along with supporting the pre-K initiatives. You can go to the next slide. Unexpected projects. So I just focused on this school year, what came at us. Not on here is the College Gate vandalism to the playground, but we had the North Star landslide last fall, along with supporting the Aquarian fire, the King Tech High School greenhouse collapse, and then most recently, I didn't include it, but because it happened this fiscal year, is the Mountain View playground that we'll be finding funds to support. And then I think, so upcoming things that we know about that were unexpected, Bartlett elevator, there's a component in that went obsolete that was brought up from an elevator inspection. That part is no longer manufactured. Our best source of trying to find it is eBay. And so we're doing what we can. We might, if we can't source that part to fix it, it's a 5-story school, as you guys know, and we need to be ADA accessible in that building. So we might be looking at almost $250,000 to support a modernization at that school, along with some unexpected expenses with the West High School exterior doors. Those doors are from the 70s, original to the building, and they've been patched and fixed so many times that you can't find anywhere to fasten a screw to anymore. So that is a safety risk, and we're working to get those completed as soon as possible. And I think Rob is going to touch a little bit on the DZEGO, which was the ESSER funds you guys directed our way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we just want to keep it well-rounded and address the fact that even though it was ESSER funded, it's real money. And we had talked about the very best way for the district. And I feel like this piece kind of bridges, it kind of has a foot in each canoe about preserving and enhancing infrastructure. So this DZEGO DVO program from Siemens is their most state-of-the-art method of digital controls to maximize the control of outside airflow. And though it doesn't say it on the slide, it goes hand in hand with the project that Tom's group is carrying out, also ESSER funded, which is the update of pneumatics. So if you picture these mile-long old plastic tubes, which are now brittle, about the diameter of a pencil that you blow air through to actuate little metal arms that open and close our vents. It's kind of Stone Age stuff. It used to be state-of-the-art 50 years ago. And that's why we get systematic, incredibly costly failures like we saw 2 winters ago at Bartlett that almost shut that school down because an entire wing is still on those pneumatic controls. So this ESSER-funded project, the DZEGO upgrade is 90% complete now. in terms of the total scope of work. We're nearing completion on the pneumatic controls portion. The good news there is not only do we optimize outside air, but we get rid of all these callouts and broken pipes where we have schools that are failing. And when a component in the middle of the winter of a pneumatic system fails, it cascades and things lock open and it just destroys pipes, which are old to begin with. So we just wanted to report on that, even though that was not from a capital fund or the general fund, and as what that will do for extending infrastructure for the district. Slide, please. Some pictures here. Carrie is the photographer to just kind of put a face to some of the emergencies we deal with. Carrie, would you care to speak to the Bartlett water line, please?
Absolutely. Can you guys hear me? All right. So we're very much in the middle of several of these projects. Nothing that I think will carry into the school year, but before and afters are always fun to see. This was a project where we worked with the municipality because this hot water supplied hot water to their showers. And they were graceful enough to allow us to put this off until the spring, where it was just more cost advantageous for us to excavate when the ground wasn't frozen. So it was kind of exploratory in nature. We didn't know how many breaks we were going to find or how deep, or really what kind of mess we were going to find when we opened it up. Luckily, we were able to find the location pretty easily, dig down, and go ahead and get that repaired, and they are now back up and running. One thing that was interesting about this photo is we had a tree that was about 15, 20 feet away from the building. And when we pulled back the earth there, you could see where the tree roots had dug into the foundation of the pool building and had left its imprint there. So it was just kind of a reminder as to what vegetation can do, even when it doesn't appear that it's super close to our buildings, but still within that 15, 20 feet, those roots really can do damage. So something that we do keep an eye on. And this here is a project that's ongoing at the moment. Spring Hill is getting their old wooden playground structure. As we said, we're piecing through and doing a few as we can. And this is what their new structure is going to look like. We hope to do more of this for our community as time goes on. This here was another earthquake project. So at Orion Elementary School, we had several areas of the floor that was damaged and cracked through multiple corridors. And we were able to work with FEMA to get new flooring in all corridors at Orion Elementary School with those FEMA funds. And so what you see there is the before, which was the VCT, and then the after, which we chose to use an LVP, which doesn't require the amount of maintenance that the VCT does. And it's supposed to give us longevity and then also cut down on the operating costs for maintaining that floor. This here is a little peek into our pre-K LVP initiative, where you can see some of our aged out carpets that are at the end of their life being changed to an LVP, which can now be sanitized and cleaned. We've selected to go with a wood grain kind of look in a lot of these classrooms. We do work closely with the teachers and get their feedback on what they think of the materials. So far, it's been really widely accepted. They love it. They love the look. They love the warmth. They love the ability to clean it. And just for our students that suffer with asthma and allergy conditions, it's all around been 5 stars. So we're excited to do more. This one here is another earthquake project. We had damage to our ceilings out at Alpenglow in the gym and the NPR. With this, we were able to replace those ceilings completely. And that included upgrading the seismic restraints to the system, to the lighting. We upgraded the sprinkler heads to the flux connections to add to that resiliency. Also, another wonderful project from FEMA to be able to do that for them. As you can see, their ceiling was Tectum, and those tiles can be pretty heavy. We're trying out a different product, which is a little bit more cost effective, but it's also much lighter. And as far as how much it weighs. And so that also adds to the seismic resiliency.
So that's kind of a wrap for this part to allow for a few questions. We really appreciate your time to present and then allowing for Jim on some closeout.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Shannon and Carrie. Jim?
So one thing we're going to do differently this year, before the CIP becomes is presented formally to the board, we're going to have a number of capital plans briefings that walk through the methodology and the logic, and looking at capital plans and the way it's developed, with a little more visual picture during work sessions and portions of finance meetings when Andy doesn't need all the time. And then, and you'll see little pieces of the CIP as it's being built throughout many of these briefings. So when you finally see it, it'll feel like you've kind of been living with it for 2 months, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it certainly will breed a lot more familiarity with the CIP. And then also, as we've done for several years with the budget briefs, we'll do one-on-one, one-on-two board member briefs with the CIP before it goes public to make sure that you actually understand where we came from, how we got our priorities, and what you're looking at. And I think that that'll give you a little bit more comfort feel for how it was developed and how those priorities exist. And, I think it'll go a long way towards transitioning to community involvement and looking at long-term strategic structures and how we're going to plan to support the district in the future.
Thank you.
And also for Mountain View, one of the senators at the state is writing in a line item for the first budget revision in January for the cost of that playground, $60,000.
Okay. So, but we're not waiting for that though, are we? Okay, thank you. I think I saw Member Jacobs, your mic was on, and then Member Higgins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. And everyone, I appreciate the information, the update, and seeing some of the photos of the work. I think Member Lesson sent me a couple of photos of some of the work going on in the South Anchorage, and it's great to see we used our summer productively to make sure we're maintaining our buildings. As we look forward to the next school bond proposition, I think that our job of continuing to educate the public on why we should wisely invest in maintaining our facilities is in an ongoing task that we should be working on. And so if there's information that you can share, this information was helpful, but if as someone who doesn't live this every day, as a subject matter expert, if there's other information that can be shared about how these projects, how we can put a face, both a student face, a family face, a staff face in some of these projects. For example, I know that the LBP has benefits for public health and the bacteria germs that can live in carpet, and there's a higher level of upkeep that's required for maintenance staff. And so putting that face in some of these projects to why they matter. And so it bond requests and routine maintenance and has that extra layer of personal touch that I think we need to make sure we're continuing to educate the public about would be helpful. Thank you.
Member Higgins, did you have a comment, question?
Sure, thank you. I'm always interested in the opportunities here in two ways. One is at one time there used to be a fund out there from the state for energy efficiency. You paid for it by guided savings. Some of those provisions were provided by the companies providing the material. They had that type of approach as well. Don't know if that's out there or not. And that to me is an issue because that's a savings that you may not get the savings immediately, but you got the repairs, you got the improvement, and long term you get the savings. So it's a win-win situation. And so that's an important issue. The other one is you've got a number of projects here that are energy efficient, their improvement. So there is a savings offset to that. And I don't know whether or not the board should at some point look at a bond that basically says we're looking at energy efficient, we're looking at this is the investment, these are the savings, this is how we will long-term save the district money and fund it within that and going forward with something. So I just see a combination of the two. I know before they didn't want to go forward with the funding from the state because they said, well, if we bond for it and we get the money, then we get the savings from year one, and it never happened. I don't like that. But I know the efficiency associated with this. We also had the ability for each one to install something that would control when utilities were cut on. I mean, if you cut on all the utilities at the same time, your highest peak rate is going to determine your cost of utilities. and we had the ability to install that on there, never did. I don't know where we are on that, but that's a no-brainer to me, because if it's low cost and it prevents your laminator from being cut on at the time when you got the ovens cut on, and your cost per kilowatt is so much less for the whole day, that's a huge savings in cost, okay, from driving it. So I'm hoping that we put some type of not only focus on that, but some type of report of it. Say, look, these types of things can anticipate to save 10%, represents 10% of the cost. This is what it represents. And being able to see that at the same time, I think helps public support and maybe expand what we're doing for that. And then the last one is, I don't know what the federal government's going to do in this sense. I mean, there seems to be a avalanche of funding coming down in regards to the energy issues and climate change and all the other stuff that's coming down to states, and will factor its way down, and how we might be impacted by that as well. And if we're doing projects that will get funded differently, that makes a difference too, from my perspective. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We are at the end of our time. We'd like to thank the staff for wonderful presentations. Very informative. Much appreciated. I'll take a motion to move into executive session.
Madam President, move that we enter executive session for the purpose of contracts, negotiation, legal updates.
Second.
All right, moved in second. Is there any opposition to moving into executive session? Hearing and seeing none, we will move into executive session.
Recording